We were forced out of our country, and adjusting to America was very, very difficult for me. And I made a mistake. I got caught up with the law at the age of 17. ICE had ordered me deported to Cambodia, and I've been on the deportation list since '95.
Cab's story is just one in a fraught history of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, commonly referred to as AAPIs.
Southeast Asians fleeing from countries destabilized by the U.S. didn't have a chance. Having been refugee kids growing up, pushed out of school, in prisons, and then you get out and then you face a deportation order.
I consider myself as American. I have 2 children that is American citizen.
Like many in our country, the 22 million strong AAPI community holds a vast array of experiences, whether an immigrant or born here, documented or undocumented.
There's complexity within the community. There's different ethnicities and languages, but the complexities are an asset.
There's a growing effort to harness these unique experiences and perspectives and turn them into a movement that ensures the community is better represented in the national conversation.
The best individuals to address the problems are those who are directly impacted.
Civic engagement is about building those connections and the people power, being able to show up en masse together to say that we deserve better.
It's a movement that can serve as inspiration for anyone fighting for a better, more inclusive future.
Civic engagement is so important because it challenges so many stereotypes. We're the group you didn't bet on that are really engaged, and we are dedicated to this because we live here. This is our home. We want it to be better.
Asian Americans are not excluded from how race is both entrenched and impacts communities. Unfortunately, that story is not always understood.
The history of violence and injustice of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders are not new. The Rock Spring Massacre, the Page Act, Chinese Exclusion Act, this injustice and discrimination was codified by law. If we know how embedded this is, the solutions we push for have to be bigger and bolder than before.
This history of AAPIs has led to a lack of engagement in civic life, which in turn has resulted in the community being underrepresented in places of power. The AAPI Civic Engagement Fund was formed to turn that around.
Until our formation, funding to local AAPI community groups have been chaotic and episodic. When you're looking at a constituency that has been historically there underinvested, and in order to do catch up, there really has to be deep investment year-round to support community engagement.
The fund supports many different groups to address the unique challenges people face, from crisis response to expanding voting access to fighting deportation. One example of that is Advancing Justice Atlanta, or AAAJ.
Atlanta 911, 717 was that just emergency?
Please come, okay.
Breaking news tonight in that deadly massacre that happened overnight at 3 Asian spas in the Atlanta area. 6 of the victims who died were Asian women.
When the shooting had happened, we were on the phone all night long. Our organization gathered all these folks for a community call at 8 a.m., and it was social service providers, attorneys, counselors. We quickly got information, and then we set up an emergency fund. The anti-Asian hate didn't go away after the shooting. Our hate mail really went up. So we're fighting back that rhetoric all the time through our legal services, advocacy work, and our civic engagement and organizing work.
AAAJ's work extends to everywhere their community experiences barriers to fully participating in civic life.
Today we're in Duluth, and we're trying to catch people as they're exiting the store, just trying to see if they're registered to vote. In Georgia, there's actually no requirement statewide that there needs to be translators or interpreters at the polls. So that's just one example of how there can be systemic barriers to people who might not speak English or potentially are immigrants that prevent them from voting.
But civic engagement also means affecting policy change outside of the election cycle. So the fund works with groups like the Southeast Asian Freedom Network to empower people who have been impacted by regressive policies.
After the United States military came into Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam and destabilized the countries, Southeast Asians come to here with the promise of stabilization of full democracy. But when we came together and support each other, they called us gangs and then threw us into gang databases, out of schools, into prisons. And for many of folks in my generation of Cambodians now face a deportation crisis. So we're excited to be here because Mumigant Farm is part of the Seafood family. Building community, building safer, brave spaces to talk about it helps families, help the individuals with orders. And when you talk about it, then you're able to find solutions.
This is big for us because it gives us a chance to bond, and it's kind of relief too, to be able just to come and hang out. Away from the fighting deportation, it definitely gives me therapy in a way. It helps me cope with my problem.
CFIN has not only destigmatized deportation for many of those affected, but has also been able to leverage the power of its national network to bring back deportees and reunite them with their families. The fund's work has been critical to advocating for better outcomes in the AAPI community. While everyone in the community has a unique story, their experiences are not unlike many who have had to fight injustices. It's an example of how we can come together to build a more inclusive democracy.
It's through those types of fights against oppressive systems that we can learn about how to build power together and where we can win. When you see all of those experiences together and the community feels empowered, then the future can be different.